builder! Why should you learn how to use the Vectorscope in your GH5 or GH5S? You can actually use your Vectorscope to see if you're hitting the skin tones in your scenes, and if you're super crafty, lighting your background with different colors to create color contrast in your scenes. Done! Roll that intro! What's up everybody, you're watching Too Long Didn't Read Filmmaker, where the answers comes first, the reasons come last, but we are constantly and always still learning. So today I'm going to go over another one of my top 5 favorite features in the GH5 and the GH5S, and that is none other than the Vectorscope. Now, what does a Vectorscope do? Basically, it's a graphical representation of what your camera is seeing in terms of color. Now, while this scope has a lot more uses in post-production, there are a couple uses you can do while in production, and since the GH5 has it, let's go over what those are. So the number one use, and arguably probably the only use, is you can use the Vectorscope to check your skin tones. Now, while I don't really know why Panasonic didn't include a skin tone line that is usually found around here on a Vectorscope, as long as you know that your skin tone should be leaning a little bit more towards the red chip over here instead of the yellow chip over here, and as you get used to it, you can kind of basically figure it out. So basically, you're going to kind of do what we did with a waveform monitor in terms of checking light levels of your talent. If you have a constant aperture zoom lens, you can zoom in and try to fill your talent's face pretty much the entire screen, and that way the camera sensor is only looking at the skin tone. If you don't have a constant aperture zoom lens, no worries, just take your camera off the tripod or whatever rig it is, walk up to your talent, make sure you're not blocking any of the light that's actually hitting their face, and then simply point at their skin. Now, obviously, if it's a little off, you can either do a custom white balance, or if you're working with bicolored LEDs or RGBW LEDs, then you can make your adjustments to try to get that skin tone as close as you can to where that line is. Now, this is awesome because if you've done a lot of color correcting in your post work from multiple cameras, then you know it's a very tedious process, especially when you're cutting back and forth. And, you know, if there's ever changing scenes or what have you, it's a lot of work. So it's good to know that at least you can get the skin tone as close as you can while in production so that you're not spending so much time in post-production just getting them consistent. Now, the second thing that you can do in terms of using Vectorscope is if you're kind of savvy with what you're doing with the background. So let's say you like to work with backgrounds and have a bunch of different colors and of course contrasting colors to kind of really make your image pop. Now, right now, I have a tungsten LED pointing at me so that my skin tone is as best as possible. And then I have a daylight bulb back there to give that nice background a little bit of a cooler look. And I like this look because color contrast. It makes me pop out and stand out a little bit better than the background. So if you're doing something like this, something as basic as this, or something as crazy where you're gonna throw up like magenta, greens, and I don't know, any other color than here, memorize what you see from the Vectorscopes when you go into editing. Because for me, I've realized that the blue chip, when it's processed digitally, it looks a little bit more magenta to me, just like a really weird hint of it. And so I know that if I'm going for blue, I don't like to go directly at the blue. I want to kind of move it a little bit closer to the cyan, just a little bit. And to me, that is the blue I like. So when I'm on set and I'm working with gels or I'm working with RGBW LEDs, what have you, again, you can point the camera at the scene and say, okay, is that background where I want it to be based on my knowledge of the Vectorscope and what I see when I'm editing? As long as you can burn these colors into your imagination, then using the Vectorscope on set is a great way to spot check what it is, so you can actually get the look into the camera and minimize the amount of tweaking you need to do in post-production. Now, I know this is probably not practical whatsoever, and really it isn't, because number 3 is going to talk about that. Okay, so the last thing that you can do with the Vectorscope is literally play with it. So what do I mean by this? Basically, I just want you to turn on the Vectorscope. You don't have to record anything. You can if you want to, but basically point it at stuff. Point it at a wall, point it at a poster, point it at shirts, and see what your camera is seeing in terms of where it lands on the Vectorscope. And then you can start playing around with the white balance, or you can play around with that really weird custom adjustment that you can do in the white balance, where you can literally tell your camera to shift the image towards blues, cyans, any color you want on the wheel, and then see what it does. The reason I want you to do this is because I want you to burn into your mind's eye what your idea of color is in terms of reference to the Vectorscope. Because the more familiar you are with that, the faster you can make judgment calls on set. So let's say, for example, you have a wardrobe team or you're asking your talent to bring some clothing options so you can see what they have. When you're there, you can literally look at the color through your Vectorscope and say, nope, that's not the right color, that's too far away, or here we go. This is the closest I can get to what I want. When you start thinking this way and you go into post-production, you can say, all I have to do is just edit the film. You don't have to be like, I need to edit this thing, and now I need to color correct it, and now the color grading because I need to make sure this shirt gets to this color, or that background and light gets to that color. I don't like to spend so much time in post-production. I want to try and get literally as close to the final look as I possibly can into the camera with minimal tweaking in post-production. And I have realized that as you start filming, color is one of the places you're probably going to spend an insane amount of time in, aside from VFX. And honestly, I don't want to spend that much time color correcting, color grading. So play with the Vectorscope, get a really good idea of what your idea of color is on that chart, and therefore you can make really quick judgment calls and create more stories. So what's the bottom line here? The bottom line is, while the Vectorscope doesn't have a whole lot of uses, it's still a very important skill set to learn. So like I said, you can literally use your Vectorscope on set to check your talent's skin tone. You can use the Vectorscope to check out what the color is doing in the background, especially if you're doing something that's really cyberpunkish or really neon lightish. You can do a lot of stuff and basically spot check what the colors are actually doing. And then lastly, like I just said, play around with it, get a really good idea of what colors are doing on the Vectorscope in your mind's eye, and therefore you can make super quick judgment calls while on set, so that when you go into post-production, you're not spending so much time color correcting and color grading. You literally got exactly what you were looking for right into the camera. And hey, that's it for this week, everybody. If this video has made all the influence in your purchasing decisions, whether you want to go with a GH5 or a GH5S, I would really appreciate it if you check out my Amazon affiliate links down below. Again, this costs nothing extra to you. It just gives me a little compensation so I can continue making videos like this for you. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, please leave it down below. I will get to them as fast as I can. Other than that, like and subscribe, and I'll see you next week.